I thought it'd be fun to explore a little bit, looking at 4 and 5 string basses, or maybe more at the 5 string. There was a stage years and years ago where you very rarely really used to see 5 string basses in England. It was a lot more popular to have a 4 string. I think generally it was, we tended, and certainly know when we were making instruments, that we would maybe get the odd order for a 5 string, 10 years ago. I think it was an odd thing, or maybe an orchestra might get one or something to have in their ranks for, playing the low notes if needed. But I've noticed a large swing towards 5 string basses. And I thought it'd be interesting to look at why that is. Fashions sort of come and go a bit with all things, including double basses. So obviously basses at one point were 3 string, then they went to 4 string, and then there's obviously 5 string basses have kind of been sort of dotted around in that. But we're finding more and more people want 5 string basses. I think the reason why people didn't like 5 string basses was because they were usually quite unmanageable. So quite often when people made a 5 string bass, it was like, we're making a 5 string, let's make everything as big and strong and thick and chunky, and let's bolster everything up, it's got extra pressure, and etc, etc. So what you've ended up with is people's experience of a 5 string bass was, God, this feels awful, I've got loads in my hand and it doesn't respond properly, and it's, it was not an enjoyable experience to play. So this actually is a bass we've just converted from 4 to 5 strings, so it's not actually finished. We've kind of not. There's still lots of bits to sort of touch in and paint and finish off the bridge and check round, etc. But I thought it would be interesting to have a look at why I think that 5 strings are becoming more popular, and that luthiers like us and other people are able to actually give a really nice playing experience, even though it's a 5 string bass, whereas normally a 4 string bass is more comfortable, say. So the first thing to look at is the neck. The neck here, you'll notice it's not actually that much wider than a 4 string. We'll have a look at a 4 string in a minute. But this neck here is only a little bit wider. It's maybe sort of 2 millimeters wider at the top, or 3 millimeters wider at the nut. And not much wider down at the bottom here, bottom of the neck butt. What that means is you'll notice that we've kind of crammed the strings onto a slightly narrower fingerboard. So what it used to be is that someone would do a 4 string spacing but add an extra string on. So before you know it, the bridge is really wide, these are all right out here. And what that allows us to do by cramming the strings on here a little bit more is that everything's not so wide, it's all a bit more comfortable. The setup that you do does have to be a lot more delicate. So it's possible, if you've got a 5 string bass and the string heights aren't right and the fingerboard shape isn't right, when you go to stop, say, the D, and you try and play it, what you end up doing is playing 2 or 3 strings because the clearances aren't quite right. But as long as you pay attention to that, this actually provides a really, really, really comfortable playing experience. The other thing that we do that I think is very important to notice is, if you'll see that the B string is basically hanging off the side. So as I say, this bridge is not finished. The whole thing, we need to drop the treble side quite a bit still. But the string is hanging off to the right here. The reason that is that when you go to play a note on the B string, you're not going to be playing right up here in most cases. But actually, when I go to stop the note, look, I pull it that way. So I'm actually pulling it across. So this can be hanging right off the side, even more than this, but it's always going to be stopped. You don't just push it down. As you push it down, just the mechanics of your hand pull this across. So even if I'm going to stop the B there, look, I've actually brought it all the way back onto the fingerboard. So actually, if you try and have the B on the fingerboard, all you're doing is wasting, you're adding depth and width to the fingerboard completely unnecessarily. So you see the G string is in a nice spot here. It's in a good place on the fingerboard. You know, that's kind of where roughly we'd expect to see it on a 4-string. Maybe it's a little bit further over, but this is way out. So what that's allowed us to do is almost use a 4-string fingerboard to create a 5-string, and our 5-strings are super comfortable to play. So that's one aspect of why 5-strings are now a lot more comfortable, and why people, I think, are sort of enjoying them more and are more inclined to get one or have their bass converted to 5 strings. Obviously, it means you can play all the low notes. You don't have to have a low C, which again, fashions have changed. I think people actually would rather have a 5-string bass, even if they've got 2 basses, have a 5-string one and a 4-string one. The other thing that people used to do was, I mean, I've done a video on this before, but this is the overstand here. So on a 5-string bass, we actually bring this out to 50, which not many people do that. That's a really big distance. So a lot of people will do 38 or 40, but we go out to, we do 40 on a 3/4, 44 on a 4/4. These are 4 strings. And if we do a 5-string, this comes all the way out to 50 mil. What that does is it brings this out from the bass a bit more. So I'm bringing the bow more and more out. So as I'm bringing this out, the bow's coming this way. And the same thing with the bridge. We bring the bridge height up quite a lot as well. So what that means is that effectively the bit you play is further away from the body, because it's a bit of a thing that used to be, or if this is all too close in, that actually by the time you're playing on the treble side here, you're stabbing into the bass. You know, and it's not an enjoyable experience. And the same thing when you go to play the low strings, that you'd be bumping into everything. So here I've got loads of clearance. Even if I had a German bow, no problem at all. And obviously this has even got to be rocked round a bit more. So I'm actually effectively going to, as these strings come down, I'm going to get even more clearance this side. So what that does is it makes the whole playing experience, you're not, you know, it used to be, especially if you're playing a German bow and the measurements weren't quite right, you were like having to sort of get right down here, like, oh, to try and sort of play the low strings. Whereas actually, if everything is in the right place and it's been thought of like this, actually this isn't uncomfortable. You're not stabbing the bass this side. You're not feeling like everything's massive. Actually, this doesn't feel a lot different in my hand than a 4-string. So I think a large part of why the fashion has changed and people are more inclined to get a 5-string is that actually the whole experience of playing it is more enjoyable, whereas it used to be, I think, pretty, you know, some of the ones that we've seen, you know, made, you know, 50 years ago or so, when there was a big fashion for lots of 5-string basses, everything is so big, and it's just, you know, you kind of, it's a full workout, and you know, going to hurt your hand and everything trying to play it. But actually, if it's well done like this, actually playing a 5-string bass is no different really than playing a 4, apart from you've got the extra notes. So it's interesting if people are thinking of, you know, do I want a 4-string, do I want a 5-string? You know, you might want to consider and have a look into getting a 5-string bass, because especially if they're well done, well converted or well designed from the start, actually it can provide a really sort of enjoyable experience to play, which is, you know, that is the main thing really. So yeah, we'll get this one finished and back out to the customer.